The candles at Renwick House burned too close together, and the heat they made was the kind that pressed against the back of the neck and made every smile feel like effort. Imogen Faircross had worn the emerald silk because Sebastian liked it, and she had positioned herself near the long window because she always did. 11 years of banquets had taught her that a woman who stands near a door is never entirely cornered. She was speaking to no one of particular consequence when she felt the presence at her shoulder, close enough that the other woman's breath reached her ear before her words did. The voice was low and deliberate, shaped by someone who had rehearsed the sentence and chosen the moment with care. And in the 3 seconds that followed, with the crystal of her wine glass still warm from her hand and the laughter of 40 guests filling the air around her, Imogen understood that the thing she had been waiting 11 years to dread had finally arrived. Not as a scandal in the morning papers, not as a whisper at the far end of a room, but here, against her own ear, spoken by a woman she had never met, in a voice that did not shake. The woman's name was Selina. Imogen would learn the rest later. In that moment, she knew only the dark hair, the composed face, and the words. That she had been the Duke of Calloway's wife for 20 years, and that Imogen ought to know it. Imogen did not pale. She had been the daughter of a Bristol physician before she was a duchess, and she had learned long before Sebastian that the way to survive a blow in company was to complete the action you were already performing. She finished her sip of wine. She set the glass down on the silver tray of the passing lackey with the same care she would have given it in her own drawing room. Then she turned her face just enough toward Selina that no one watching from across the room would read anything but 2 women exchanging pleasantries. And she spoke in a voice pitched below the nearest conversation. "If that is true," Imogen said, "then you have shared a bed with a bigamist for 20 years. And I will ensure that every solicitor in London knows it before noon tomorrow." The lackey did not move. Selina's expression did not change, not precisely. But something behind it shifted, some small calculation that Imogen registered without understanding yet. Then Imogen straightened, turned back toward the room, and that was when she saw Sebastian. He was 15 feet away, in the middle of a sentence with Lord Hartwell, and he was watching her face. He had not heard the exchange, she was certain of that. But he had seen something in her expression that had made him stop mid-word, because that was what Sebastian did. He watched her in rooms the way a man watches a compass, and when the needle moved unexpectedly, he moved with it. He excused himself from Hartwell with a word and a brief inclination of his head, and he crossed the room toward her without hurrying, without any visible urgency, which was precisely how she knew he was alarmed. He reached her and took her arm just above the elbow. His hand was warm through the silk, and his grip was the kind that asked nothing of her. It simply established that he was there. "We are leaving," he said, in a voice meant only for her. "We haven't said good night to Lord Renwick." "No," Sebastian agreed, and steered her toward the door. She let him, because the alternative was remaining in that room with Selina still standing 3 feet away, and because her hands had begun, very quietly, to do something she refused to call trembling. They passed through the entrance hall and out into the cool of the September evening without collecting their host, without explanation to anyone. And behind them, the first version of the story began to move between guests the way fire moves through dry grass. One breath, and then it is already somewhere else. The Calloway carriage was brought round in 4 minutes. Sebastian handed her in himself. He sat across from her, not beside her, and the lantern light inside the carriage made the planes of his face very clear and very still. They were 3 streets from Renwick House before he spoke. "Tell me what she said." Imogen looked at him steadily. She told me she has been your wife for 20 years. The carriage moved. The wheels found a rough patch of cobblestone and the lantern swayed. And in that brief, uncertain light, she watched his face for the thing she was most afraid to find. Not guilt, not calculation, but the specific quality of a man who has been caught in something he already knew. What she found instead was harder to name. He did not deny it immediately. He drew a slow breath, and his jaw set in the way it did when he was ordering his words with care. And that pause, 3 seconds, perhaps 4, was the answer that mattered before any words arrived. There was a woman named Selina, he said. Imogen said nothing. It was before you, before the title. I was told it had been resolved. Resolved, Imogen repeated. Dissolved. Legally. He met her eyes. I believed it. She turned her face toward the window. The streets of London passed in lamplight and shadow, the same streets she had driven through 100 evenings, returning from 100 engagements. And they looked exactly as they always had, which struck her as improbable. Did you believe it? She asked. Or did you simply not look closely enough to know the difference? Sebastian did not answer. That too was an answer. They arrived at Calloway House in silence that neither of them broke. The footman opened the carriage door, and Imogen descended without taking his hand. In the entrance hall, she gave her wrap to the housemaid and turned, not toward the stairs, but toward the corridor that led to the nursery. Sebastian watched her go. She climbed to the nursery on the 2nd floor and opened the door quietly. The room smelled of beeswax and the particular warmth of a sleeping child. And Arthur lay on his side with his dark hair pushed back from his forehead, his mouth slightly open, one hand curled beside his cheek. He was 9 years old. He had Sebastian's jaw and her father's eyes, and he was entirely, absolutely unconscious of the fact that 40 people were at this moment passing a story between them that concerned his existence. Imogen stood at the foot of his bed for a long time. She did not cry. She was not, in that moment, the kind of frightened that produced tears. She was the kind that produced silence. She went to bed. The rumor reached 3 households before morning. 2 nights later, rain came against the study windows in long, uneven waves, and the room smelled of coal smoke and the leather of old books, and Sebastian was at his desk when Imogen came in and closed the door behind her. She had not been to his study since the night of the banquet. She had been civil at breakfast and absent at dinner, and had answered his one attempt at conversation with sufficient courtesy to make further attempts feel unjustified. She had, in other words, conducted herself with the particular precision of a woman who has decided to wait until she can speak without the words coming out wrong. She stood before his desk now, and she did not sit down. I need to know, she said, whether any part of what that woman claimed is true. Sebastian set down his pen. He said simply, yes. Then tell me exactly what is true, not what you believe, what you know. He was quiet for a moment, and then he stood, because sitting while she stood was not something he was willing to do. He moved to the window and looked at the rain, and then he turned back to face her. I was 21, he said. We were very young, both of us. It was a private ceremony, no announcement, nothing that reached the papers. My father discovered it 3 months later. He paused. He told me it had been dissolved. Annulled? He said he had retained a clergyman to manage the documents and that the matter was closed. I believed him. And you never mentioned it to me? No. In 11 years. He held her gaze. No. I did not consider. I believed it was over. Finished before it had properly begun. It did not occur to me that it was something you had a right to know. The rain pressed against the glass. Imogen moved to the chair across from his desk, but did not sit in it. She set one hand on the back of it, as though she needed something solid. "That is the part," she said, "that I cannot account for. Not the marriage. Not even the fact that your father managed it without telling you the whole of it. The part I cannot account for is this. You brought me into a life, Sebastian, and you gave me 11 years in it. And in all of that time, you did not think I deserved to know that the ground under me had not been checked. Imogen, I have spent 11 years, she said, and her voice did not rise, which was somehow worse than if it had. Knowing that half this city thinks I married above my station and waited for me to prove it. And I told myself that did not matter because my marriage was real, because the ground was solid. And you knew, or you should have known, that there was a question you had never asked, and you let me stand on it anyway. Sebastian said nothing. He stood very still, and the quality of his stillness was not composure. It was a man receiving something he had earned. I am going to the rooms in the old wing, Imogen said, not because I am punishing you, because I need to think without you in the room, deciding what my conclusions ought to be. She left. The door closed quietly. Sebastian remained where he was for a long time, with the rain against the glass and the fire going low, and the specific weight of a silence he had made without knowing he was making it. By the following Monday, 2 separate investigations had begun. Imogen had retained Mr. Aldous Petch, a London investigator of considerable discretion and limited sentiment, whom her brother Edmund had used twice in matters of estate business. She gave Petch a single instruction: trace Selina's finances and movements over the previous 2 years, beginning with the earliest point at which her name had appeared in connection with the Calloway title. Petch asked no questions beyond the practical ones and departed the same afternoon. Sebastian, for his part, had gone to the archive room on the 3rd floor of Calloway House and begun working through his father's papers box by box. The old Duke had been dead for 6 years. He had been a man of methodical habits and significant correspondence, and he had kept everything. The boxes filled an entire wall of shelving, and Sebastian worked through them each evening after the household had gone to bed, in the particular quiet of a man who is searching for something he is not certain he wants to find. Lord Renwick appeared at the Marquis of Ashton's card evening on Tuesday, and at Lady Pemberton's afternoon gathering on Thursday. Both times he sought out Sebastian with the manner of a man performing concern. A hand on the arm, a lowered voice, expressions of sympathy regarding the unfortunate business, and offers of assistance that were just vague enough to be declined without offense. Sebastian accepted the sympathy, declined the assistance, and noted each appearance with the attention of a man filing information he does not yet know how to use. On Wednesday evening, Imogen came to the study. She sat across the table from him, not across the desk, but at the long table where the papers were spread, and she opened a small notebook and set it before her. Petch has established that Selina was in serious debt 18 months ago, Imogen said. Creditors, her son's school fees outstanding, a lease on her rooms in arrears. By last spring, all of it was current. He is tracing the source of the payments. I found nothing in the first 4 boxes, Sebastian said. Correspondence from 1804 to 1808. Nothing that mentioned Selina or the clergyman my father would have retained. He paused. There is more to go through. Imogen made a note. Your father's solicitor, Graves, is he still practicing? He retired to Bath. He is in his 80s. Would he remember? He would remember everything, Sebastian said. He remembered everything. But whether he would speak to it is another question. They sat for a moment in the particular atmosphere of 2 people occupying the same room with a problem between them rather than a silence. It was not warmth, not yet. But it was something different from the distance of the previous days. Imogen closed her notebook. "I am not trying to find evidence against you," she said. "I know that. I am trying to find out what actually happened. Because if someone has constructed this, I want to know who and why before we are in a position where we cannot choose how to respond." Sebastian looked at her across the papers. "Whoever it is," he said, "they chose their moment. The Banquet. Renwick's house." He paused. "I keep returning to that." Imogen said nothing, but she did not close the notebook immediately, and the next evening she came back. The letter was in the 14th box. Sebastian found it on a Thursday night, past midnight, with a single candle burning low and his coat long since removed. It was folded inside a larger document, a land survey that had no business being in that particular box, as though it had been placed there to be obscured without being destroyed. The handwriting was his father's, addressed to a Reverend Thomas Crail at a parish in Hertfordshire. The date was 1803. The sum mentioned in the body of the letter was £300, which was a great deal of money to pay a country clergyman for what the letter described, with deliberate vagueness, as the management of a private ecclesiastical matter. The name Crail meant nothing to Sebastian. He read the letter twice, and then he carried it downstairs. It was past midnight. The old wing was dark except for the light under Imogen's door. He knocked. She opened it in her dressing gown, a book still in her hand, and she looked at him and then at the letter. "Come in," she said. He set the letter on the small table beside the lamp and stepped back so she could read it. She read it once without speaking, and then she read it again. Then she set it down and said, "Sit." He sat in the chair near the window. She sat across from him, the letter between them, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "Crail," she said, "do you know anything about him?" "Nothing. The name means nothing to me." "Petch can find him, or find what became of him." She looked at the letter again. £300 in 1803. That is not a fee for legitimate legal work. "No," Sebastian said. "Your father paid a clergyman a substantial sum to manage a private ecclesiastical matter 20 years ago, and that clergyman's name appears nowhere in any document you were given about the annulment." "I was given very little about the annulment," Sebastian said. "My father told me it was done. I was 21 and I trusted him." Imogen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me about when you first came to the ford crossing." It was an unexpected turn, and he felt it as such. "The ford at Ashley?" "Before you were a duke. Before all of this. You were, what, 23? 24. My father had died the previous winter." He looked at her. "You were crossing with your brother, and the horse shied at the water. I was on the bank." "You steadied my arm," Imogen said. "You didn't introduce yourself. You just put out your hand and steadied my arm until I had my footing, and then you stepped back." "I remember." "You were the first person in my memory," she said, "who steadied me without then telling me where to stand." She looked at the letter. "That is what I am trying to find my way back to, whether that man and this situation can exist at the same time." Sebastian did not answer immediately, because the answer that came to him was not the right one to give quickly. He looked at her, at the lamp making her face warm and serious, at the book still marked with her finger, at the woman who had come into his life at a ford crossing and stayed through 11 years of everything. And he said, "I am not going to tell you what to conclude, but I am going to find out exactly what my father did. All of it. And then whatever you decide, you will decide it knowing everything." She held his gaze. Then she reached across the table and turned the letter face down, not discarding it, but setting it aside, and she said, "Have Petch find Crail. First thing tomorrow." He left her room an hour later, and the quality of the walk back through the dark corridor was different from the walk there. Not resolved, not repaired, but no longer entirely separate. The same week, in the middle of Wednesday's afternoon lessons, Arthur asked his tutor whether the heir to a dukedom was always the duke's son, or whether sometimes it could be someone else. The tutor, a cautious man named Mr. Finch, had answered carefully, and then gone directly to find Imogen. She had heard the question secondhand, but the hearing of it was enough. That night, she and Sebastian both went to the nursery. Arthur was already asleep. They sat on either side of the bed for a few minutes, and then they moved to the corridor. And in the corridor, Sebastian put his hand down, and she put hers into it. And they stood like that without speaking until the candle in the wall sconce burned down another half-inch. The mechanism that had created this danger now had a shape. They needed only its name. Petch delivered his report on a Friday morning, and he delivered 2 findings at once, which he presented without preamble and without apparent awareness that each one was a different kind of blow. The first was a signed statement from Reverend Thomas Crail, now retired, aged 71, residing in a village outside Bury St. Edmunds. The statement was witnessed by Petch himself and by the village magistrate. In it, Crail confirmed that in the autumn of 1803, he had been approached by the then Duke of Calloway and paid £300 to produce documentation of an annulment that had never, in any legal sense, occurred. The ceremony of marriage between Sebastian Faircross, then heir to the Calloway dukedom, and Miss Selina Marsh had been valid under ecclesiastical law. It had never been dissolved. Crail had carried the knowledge for 20 years, he said, because the old duke was powerful and the payment was generous, and he had told himself it was a private matter between noble families. He was, the statement concluded, prepared to repeat these words before any court or ecclesiastical panel that required them. The second finding was a ledger of payments. 14 months of transactions, drawn from an account held in the name of a property management firm in Holborn that Petch had traced through 3 intermediate records to Lord Aldous Renwick. The payments were made to Selina at irregular intervals, but the dates, when Petch laid them against a timeline of events, aligned with a precision that was not accidental. A payment 3 days before the first time Selina's name had been mentioned in connection with Calloway in any social setting. A payment 2 weeks before the banquet. A payment the day after. Imogen read both documents at the desk in the old wing study, and when she had finished, she sat for a moment with her hands flat on the table. Then she went to find Sebastian. He was in the main study, and she set both documents in front of him without speaking. He read them. When he looked up, she saw something move through his face that was not surprise. It was the particular expression of a man whose suspicion has been confirmed at a scale larger than he had allowed himself to anticipate. "Renwick," he said. "He is your heir presumptive," Imogen said. "If our marriage is found invalid, Arthur's legitimacy falls with it. The title reverts. He has been engineering this for over a year. He found Selina, paid her debts, paid her son's school fees, and waited for the right moment." Imogen sat down. She was not acting on her own behalf. She was acting under the terms of an arrangement she may not have had the freedom to refuse. Sebastian looked at her. "You sound almost sympathetic." "I am almost sympathetic," Imogen said. "She is not the one who built the trap. She is the one who was placed inside it." Sebastian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking," Imogen said, "that I need to speak to Selina alone." Renwick moved first. Sebastian's solicitor, Mr. Graves the younger, the son of the elder, carrying the same careful manner, arrived at Calloway House on a Monday morning with the news that Selina had filed a formal petition at Doctors' Commons. The whisper at the banquet had become a legal document. The petition named Sebastian as a party to a valid prior marriage and requested a formal determination of the status of his subsequent union with Imogen. Graves the younger was measured in his presentation, which meant the news was bad. "Even if we prevail," he said, setting his papers on the desk, "the case will take time. Months, possibly longer. In the interim, the petition is a matter of public record. Anyone who wishes to find it may find it. The rumor ceases to be a rumor and becomes a legal proceeding." "Renwick knows this," Sebastian said. "Renwick is counting on it," Imogen said, from her chair by the window. Graves looked at her with the slightly startled expression of a solicitor encountering a client's wife who has already done his analysis for him. "Your Grace is correct," he said carefully. "The petition itself, regardless of outcome, accomplishes a great deal of what Lord Renwick requires." After Graves had left, Imogen sat for a moment in the chair, and then she stood and said, "I am going to see Selina." "Imogen." "I am not asking your permission, Sebastian. I am telling you what I intend to do." She looked at him steadily. "She is being used by a man who paid her debts to purchase her cooperation. She has a son. She had presumably no very good options when Renwick found her. I want to hear it from her directly. She humiliated you in front of 40 people." "Renwick did that," Imogen said. "He chose the room and the moment and the words she would say. She was the instrument." She picked up her gloves from the table. "I have been the instrument of other people's designs before. I know what it looks like from the outside." She arranged the meeting through an intermediary, a brief note, a neutral address, a time when neither household would miss either of them. Selina arrived first. She was sitting very straight in the chair when Imogen came in, and she looked like a woman who had prepared for a confrontation and was uncertain whether preparation was going to be enough. Imogen sat across from her. She did not speak immediately. She studied the other woman's face, the composure that was the same composure she had seen at the banquet, and beneath it, something that had not been visible in a candlelit salon. The particular exhaustion of a person who has been frightened for a long time. "I am not here to accuse you," Imogen said. "I have read the payments. I know how this arrangement was structured. What I need to know is whether you entered it willingly, or whether you entered it because you could not see a way to refuse." Selina looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "My son's fees were 4 quarters in arrears. My own creditors had begun to make themselves known at the door. Lord Renwick came to me last winter with an offer. He said he required only that I make a public claim at a time of his choosing in a setting he would arrange. He would pay my debts and continue a quarterly allowance as long as the matter remained active." "And if you refused?" "He did not say exactly. He did not need to. He had already made clear that he knew the extent of my debts and the name of my son's school." Selina's voice was even. "I understood what the alternative was." "He threatened your son's schooling," Imogen said. "He indicated it was within his power to make things considerably worse." Selina met her eyes. "I know what I did. I know what it cost you. I am not asking you to forgive it." "I am not offering forgiveness," Imogen said. "I am offering something more practical." She set a folded document on the table between them. "This is a formal arrangement, witnessed by my brother Edmund Faircross, who is a barrister. It establishes a legal protection against any financial pressure Renwick may bring to bear on you, and commits to a guaranteed income independent of anything he controls. It is effective the moment you sign it." Selina looked at the document. Then she looked at Imogen. "You do not know yet whether your own marriage will survive this." "No," Imogen said. "I do not. You are offering me protection before you know what you have to protect." Her voice was quiet. "Yes." The room was still. Outside, a cart moved slowly along the street, and the sound of it faded. And then there was only the document on the table and two women on either side of it. "What do you need from me?" Selina asked. "The truth," Imogen said. "At whatever point it is required and in whatever form it is required. That is all." Selina reached across the table and picked up the pen. Doctors' Commons on a gray October morning had the atmosphere of a place that has witnessed a great deal of human difficulty and been unmoved by any of it. The paneled room smelled of old paper and lamp oil, and the gallery above the floor was already occupied when Imogen and Sebastian arrived with Graves the Younger and Edmund Faircross, who carried a leather document case with the focused expression of a man who has been waiting for this day with considerable impatience. Renwick was already present, seated with his own solicitor, and he looked across the room at Sebastian with an expression of careful neutrality that cost him some visible effort to maintain. Sebastian did not look at him. He seated Imogen to his left and stood until the panel was assembled. Graves the Younger presented the clergyman's confession first. He read aloud the material portions: Crail's account of the payment, the false documentation, the nature of what had been produced and what had not. And the panel listened with the particular stillness of men absorbing information that is both old and consequential. Renwick's solicitor objected to the confession as hearsay from an elderly witness of uncertain reliability. Graves produced the magistrate's witnessing signature and the note confirming Crail's willingness to appear in person if required. And the objection was set aside. Then Edmund Faircross stood. He opened the leather case and removed the payment ledger, which Petch had assembled with the particular thoroughness of a man who understood that his work would be examined by hostile eyes. Edmund presented it without flourish. 14 months of payments, each entry dated, each amount recorded, each date set against a corresponding event in the timeline of the petition's development. He did not editorialize. He read the dates and the amounts and named the corresponding events one by one. And the room grew very quiet as the pattern became visible. Renwick's solicitor rose. "These payments represent charitable support extended to a family acquaintance in reduced circumstances. Lord Renwick is well known for his private generosity to those." "The account from which these payments were drawn," Edmund said, without raising his voice, "is registered to Holborn Property Associates." Holborn Property Associates was incorporated in 1821 under the directorship of one Mr. James Carver, who has provided a sworn statement that the account was opened at the direct instruction of Lord Renwick and operated exclusively at his direction. Edmund set the statement on the table. Charitable support does not require a property management intermediary. It does not require 14 months of irregular payments timed to specific acts of public pressure. And it does not, as a rule, come with instructions. Renwick said something to his solicitor in a low voice. His solicitor wrote something on a paper. Neither of them looked comfortable. Selina was called. She walked to the witness position with the same composure she had worn at the banquet, and she did not look at Renwick as she passed him. She looked at the panel, and she answered the questions put to her plainly and completely. She described the visit Renwick had paid her in the winter of the previous year. She described the nature of the arrangement as it was proposed, what she was asked to do, what she was promised, and what she understood would occur if she declined. She described the banquet, the words she had been given, the moment she had chosen to say them. She said these things without apparent emotion and without apparent shame, in the voice of a woman who has decided that the cost of silence is higher than the cost of being heard. When she had finished, Renwick's solicitor attempted a cross-examination that lasted 4 minutes before the panel cut it short. And then Sebastian stood. He had not told Imogen he intended to speak. She turned to look at him, and he met her eyes for a moment before he faced the panel. And in that moment, she saw the thing she had been watching for since the night of the banquet. Not the ducal composure, not the controlled and careful management of a man who had learned to govern his face in public, but the man who had steadied her arm at a ford crossing without introducing himself, who had understood without being told that what she needed was not guidance, but ground. "Before this panel reaches its determination," Sebastian said, and his voice carried to every corner of the room with the particular clarity of a man who has decided exactly what he means to say. "I wish to state, for the record, the following. Whatever a court determines about a ceremony conducted when I was 21 years old, a ceremony I was told had been legally dissolved and which I had no cause to doubt, I have been married to Imogen Faircross in every matter that can be counted for 11 years. She is the mother of my son. She is the woman who has managed this household, attended every obligation, and conducted herself with more dignity than this proceeding deserves. I did not give her a complete account of my past, and that omission cost her years of certainty she was entitled to. I am not able to give her those years back." He paused. "What I can give her is this. I intend to remain her husband by whatever legal instrument is required, and I intend to begin that process today, before I leave this building, regardless of what this panel decides." He sat down. Imogen did not reach for his hand. She looked forward, at the panel, at the room, at the document Edmund was setting on the table. But her shoulder was against his, and she did not move it away. And after a moment his hand came to rest on the bench between them, and she set her own hand over it, and that was the whole of it. Small, invisible to the gallery, entirely sufficient. The panel deliberated for 40 minutes. When they returned, the determination was unambiguous. The petition was dismissed. The original ceremony, while technically unchallenged, was found to have been followed by documentation of annulment, fraudulent as established by the confession, and the panel recommended immediate formal proceedings to establish a legitimate dissolution on the same grounds, which would carry full legal weight. Lord Renwick was referred to the relevant authorities on the matter of the payments and the coercion of a witness. He left the room without speaking to anyone. Selina, in the corridor afterward, stopped in front of Imogen. She did not say anything for a moment. "Thank you," she said finally, "for the arrangement, and for—" She stopped. "I am sorry for the banquet." "I know you are," Imogen said. Then she said, "Your son's school fees are covered through the end of next year. Petch will be in touch about the remainder of the arrangement." Selina nodded once, and then she walked away down the corridor, and Imogen watched her go with the expression of a woman who has put something down that was heavy and does not intend to pick it up again. They arrived at Calloway House before dawn had fully broken, and the house was still quiet, the footmen only just beginning to move through the lower rooms. Sebastian and Imogen went to the main study, where the fire had been banked but not extinguished, and Sebastian added coal while Imogen sat in the chair she had occupied for 11 years of this room's life. The documents from the evening were on the table. The city outside was the pale gray of early morning, and the birds had not yet started. Sebastian stood by the fire for a moment, and then he turned and said, "There is nothing left. Nothing I know that you do not. Everything my father did, everything Renwick arranged, everything Crail signed, and Selina said, you know all of it. I know all of it. We are standing in the same place." Imogen looked at him across the room. He had said what he needed to say at Doctors' Commons, not to the panel, she understood now, not to the gallery, but to her. He had said it in a room full of people because that was the only way to say it in a way she could not doubt later, could not second-guess in a quiet hour, could not attribute to private convenience. He had put it on the record. He had made it a fact. She stood up. She crossed the room to where he was standing by the fire, and she put her hands against his chest, and she kissed him. It was not forgiveness. She had thought, in the weeks before, that if this moment came, it would feel like forgiveness, like releasing something. It did not feel like that. It felt like a decision, made with full information, by a woman who had spent 11 years on uncertain ground and was choosing now to claim the ground herself. She kissed him, and she felt him go very still for a moment, and then not still at all. And his arms came around her, and the fire was warm against her side, and the city outside was waking up. Later, when the light had shifted, and the household had begun to stir, she sat at the writing table by the window with a cup of tea and a letter she was composing to Edmund. Sebastian sat in the chair beside the fire with his own cup, reading nothing, watching her write. The room had the particular quality of a morning that comes after a long effort, not triumphant, not quiet exactly, but settled. In the months that followed, the formal proceedings moved with the efficiency of well-prepared documentation. The annulment was established on legitimate grounds. The ecclesiastical record was corrected. Arthur's legitimacy was confirmed without qualification and entered into the permanent record with the kind of legal specificity that left no room for future doubt. Lord Renwick, faced with the evidence Petch had assembled and Edmund had presented, retired from public life in the manner of a man who has calculated that silence is his remaining asset. Selina received an independent income drawn from Renwick's settled accounts as part of the legal resolution, a detail that Imogen had requested specifically, and that gave her a private satisfaction she did not discuss with anyone. Arthur, who had never been told the whole of it, was told only that there had been a legal question about an old document and that it had been resolved. He accepted this with the equanimity of a 9-year-old who had not fully understood the question and found the answer unremarkable. He went back to his lessons. He asked his tutor no further questions about the nature of inheritance. And 1 year later, on a morning in April when the nursery garden at Callaway was doing what it did every spring, filling up with green and disorder and the particular extravagant optimism of things that have survived winter, Sebastian opened the garden door, and Imogen went through it ahead of him, and he closed the door behind them both. The garden was small and private, walled on 3 sides by old stone, with the espaliered pear trees along the south wall just coming into leaf. Arthur was somewhere else in the grounds with his tutor. The air smelled of turned earth and something floral that had not yet opened. Imogen stopped in the middle of the path and turned her face up toward the light for a moment, and Sebastian came to stand beside her, and they stood like that, without speaking. Later that morning, she sat at the writing table in the study with the window open to the spring air, and she signed a letter, a formal letter, a document of some consequence relating to the Callaway Estate Charitable Fund, which she had been managing for the past 8 months. She signed it in full, as she always signed formal documents now. Imogen, Duchess of Callaway. She had signed that name for 11 years. She had signed it carefully, correctly, with the handwriting she had practiced until it was fluent. And she had carried it through every room in which it was doubted, and every morning in which she had wondered whether the ground beneath it would hold. The ground held. 2 cups of tea sat on the table, both warm. Sebastian's was on the left. He had brought them both up from breakfast and set hers beside the inkwell without comment, which was the kind of thing he had always done and which she had always noticed without saying so. The letter was signed. The window was open. The garden below was green and unreasonable, and entirely alive. She set down the pen. She picked up her tea. Outside, a bird was making a great deal of noise about something, and the pear trees along the south wall were coming into leaf. And the name at the bottom of the letter was hers, not borrowed, not provisional, not held on uncertain ground, but hers, in the way that things become yours not when they are given, but when you have decided to keep them.